Hi, so I'm Heather Hansen. I operate a daycare program or early childhood program in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I also own an organization called Do Resources, and that's Lilo. And so Do Resources has put on conferences here in Halifax, and I travel and go to lots of conferences too. This is my daughter, Deliska. I have two daughters, and my eldest has spent time working. She worked a whole summer at the program, and Deliska has volunteered there off and on. And both of them went to Kids Are Kids Early Learning Center for many, many years when they were teeny, teeny, tiny. So Deliska has spent the past 7 weeks with me almost every day. And so could you make it so that you're like fully in the camera? So she's been involved a lot. Like she's heard me talking a lot about centers that are offering care for children during COVID. We should really have the kitchen lights off. They're
so gonna do that?
Yeah, sure. So she's been she's been doing her thing. She's been doing her homework from high school. And she comes out and wanders out and says, "What are you working on, Mama?" And I'll tell her, "Oh, I'm in like a Zoom and we're talking about this, or I'm currently working with the team of Kids Are Kids, or I'm in a Zoom with a bunch of providers from around North America." And so I have friends and colleagues throughout both North America and on other continents who have been providing, and here, obviously in Canada, who have not closed their centers, or they closed their centers for a very brief period of time, and then they reopened and have been providing programs for very young children during the pandemic. And so now many, many cities and provinces and states and countries are starting to open things back up again. And so this week, I told Lisky, that's her nickname, about how a teacher, Tom Hobson, she's heard me talk about him before, had written a post called "Birds of a Feather Flock Together." And so today's Mother's Day, and we were hanging out. She made me breakfast in bed, and I told her quite early today that our friend, Dan Hodgins, she knows Dan very well. He's been right here at this very table and played games with us, had written a post that, had some similarities to Tom's. And I said, I did a response video. I did a response video to Tom's article. And I said, I feel like I have to do a response video to Dan's. And so Lisky asked me a bunch of questions. And then I said, well, why don't you please, I asked you earlier in the week to read Tom's article, and I said, why don't you read the two of them? So she just read the two of them. So Lisk, what do you think about them? What are your thoughts? And she seems like she's right stressed out because she's young or something or whatever, but you know what? You're almost an adult, and you know a lot about early childhood.
Oh.
So you read Tom, so what did you think of Tom? So you can look at me, not them. So, what did you think of Tom's? Like, what did you think? What did it say to you?
Well, my initial question that I asked you after I read it was, like, are they saying we should not open daycares back up? Because, like, it seems like they're telling us it's impossible to bring kids back into daycares without them, like, with them not going together, like, with them social distancing. But, I don't know, it's just, like, seems like they're very much against it. And it's just...
So that was, so she read both articles, and her question to me right away was, are they saying, as in Tom and Dan, are they saying that daycare shouldn't reopen? And so I answered so quickly. I said, no, I don't think they're saying that. But then I said, you know what? I don't know, because we don't have Dan and Tom here with us. I mean, Tom ended his article with saying that he's not trying to like encourage or institute a public policy. And Dan did not end his with I strongly advise all daycares to not reopen, or I strongly advise all governments to not reopen early childhood, right? Like, neither of them said that. Dan, so Tom's, like, I was curious about your perspective about the two of them, because you definitely see the similarity that they're saying.
Oh, they're definitely saying the same thing. Well, not the same thing, but like relatively the same thing. They have the same message, I'm pretty sure, because like Tom was saying that Dan's message was more of like, he told the kids, like at one point in time he told a kid that like he'll miss him forever or something, or he'll always wait for him forever when he's not there. And so Dan's message was a little bit of like I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say. But.
So Tom's article was called "Birds of a Feather Will Flock
Right.
Together."
Yeah.
And he used an activity that he did with the kids as an example. And he is incredibly descriptive. Like, he even described them breathing together as they were hugging and everything like that. Mm-hmm. He very much paints a very vivid picture, and he pulls your emotions. And Dan also does, because right from the beginning he calls his we've been waiting for you. Mm-hmm. I think he called his I've been waiting for you, but it's he talks about Bev, and we know Bev and Miss Bev, and the song We've Been Waiting for You, and how it's more than just a song. And he talks about, in his article, he directly says a child's name, so I feel like I can say it because it's on the internet. He talks about Eric. Eric is somebody he talks about a lot in his presentation. I feel like I know Eric. Never met Eric. Don't know how old Eric is now, but he does talk about him. And Eric, when he says, I've been waiting for you. And Eric said, how long would you wait for me?
And Dan said forever.
Dan said forever.
And so, like, that's a really good message, because I'm sure all these kids, like, obviously Zoom classes are not the same as in real life classes. Like, so they could be, like, it's just good for them to remember that their teachers miss them and, like, are thinking about them during this time.
That it's a real connection.
Yeah. And not just, like, they look after them for the day and then they don't go home and think about them or anything like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I don't have an answer to your question. I think that's such a good question. Are Dan and Tom, so Dan and Tom, are you saying centers should not reopen? So
that's not necessarily a bad thing that they're saying. I'm just
right.
asking. Yeah.
Right. No, we're not judging if that's what they're saying. Opinions are very important. Everybody should have an opinion. So the other day, how I did my response video to Tom's piece was because it really hit me. It really hit me. And so I actually read it out loud in a video. I read it out loud, and then I responded to it, and I responded very emotionally. And I'm going to be super honest with you and whoever watches, that this morning reading Dan's piece was even harder than reading Tom's piece. And
really?
and Tom's piece sort of killed me. Tom's piece took every single thing that I know about child development and what is best practices for children, and it brought them all up to the very surface of my skin, from my heart and from my core, and said, man, this is it. This is what it is. This is it. And I read it out loud with passion, and I was like, you can't do this. You cannot socially distance children. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. It's wrong to do. I said, I know for a fact, because I then had a video with someone else who had a different opinion, and she said, you said it's wrong. And the thing that she said at the very end, so I'm talking about Corey Berg, and we're also friends with Corey Berg. We've like slept in the same cabin with Corey Berg in Vermont, and we've known her for 6 years or 5 or 6 years. And she said that she ended that video with a statement that sometimes information is out of date. And like you and I were just talking about masks and children, and how Dan has always said that the minute, like he's talked about like around Halloween and things like that, because Halloween is not developmentally appropriate for young kids. And so at a lot of preschools and daycares, teachers go off and get dressed, like perhaps at nap time or whatever, and they get ready for a Halloween party, which is also not developmentally appropriate. And then the children who have relationships with the teacher see the teacher looking so different. And if you're going to do that, which again, it's not appropriate, but if you're going to do that, you definitely shouldn't put a mask over your face, because there's so much child developmental theory and research that says that as the child forms the relationship with you, this is when you look at me and I say something to you. I mean, you can be in your room and I say something to you, and you know from the tone of my voice what kind of mood I'm in. But when you were a little girl, the thing that gave you the cues to how my emotions were and how our relationship was growing
Was your face?
was my face.
Yeah.
And as an infant and a toddler, turn that phone upside down, Deliska
I'm sorry.
Allison. As an infant and a toddler, I watched you learn to express your face as well. And so, you know, I said to you, like, I know Dan has always been adamant that when you wear a mask, for very young children, toddlers and infants especially, you no longer are the person that they know.
Yeah. But there's a lot of, like, expression and emotion in your eyes. And they can still see your eyes. And I know you look different, but, like, if you smile and you cover your mouth, you still sort of look like you're smiling. And I know it's a lot different for kids to understand that, but I don't know.
So then all the centers that have been offering care for kids, they've been doing it.
Yeah.
And some of them have worn masks, and some of them have, like legally, they've had inspections where health inspectors come in regularly to make sure they're following these rules and guidelines that are set out. And you can get in a lot of trouble if you're not making sure the children socially distance, and if you're not wearing masks, if that's one of the restrictions of that jurisdiction. So I've been talking to some of these centers. And not just Corey Center. I think it's really important that people know that, because if people might think, like, is that truly representative? That's one center. And these kids are doing good. They're doing good. They're playing. They're having real play. They're still having real connections with the teachers that they knew before. And some of them are digging the masks. One little guy just turned 2 and hadn't had a mask because kids under 2 at that program didn't have to wear them. And he had his 2nd birthday. And he could not wait to have his mask. Like, he was, like, jealous that other people had masks. And like, they're playing. They don't seem traumatized. I think that we have to remember, like, when you think of children in the Holocaust, children who experienced 9/11, children who lived through horrible times, kids are really resilient. And so if you're giving them security and love and food and shelter, and you're meeting their basic needs, I don't know how many times, I don't know if you're familiar with, have you ever heard of, I feel like you have, but maybe you haven't. I don't think we've ever discussed it. It's called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So somebody watching is going to wind up correcting me, I'm sure. But what it looks like, Lisk, is it's a pyramid. You know, in the textbook, it's a pyramid.
Right.
Or the research journal or whatever or Google. And so at the very bottom, the little part of the pyramid, all these parts, as it's going up and getting up towards the pointy top of the pyramid, it's listing things that we need, like food and shelter and security and a sense of belonging and these kinds of things. And way up here at the very tippy top, which is what apparently human beings strive to get to, is called, I'm boring.
No.
I'm boring her.
I had to get up early and make you breakfast.
Oh, that's right. She had to get up early and make Mama's breakfast in bed. So, at the very tippy top, it's called self-actualization. And that is apparently, this is where people are going to correct me, is like what you as one individual human at your ultimate development, like when you can actually self-actualize and be all that you can be and be the best person you are and you know, but to do that and to do any of these things in the pyramid, if you don't have these things at the bottom,
you can't.
The safety and the security and the acceptance and all of that, this will never happen.
Right.
So my thoughts, because even for kids are kids, we've had some Zooms with some kids, and we don't believe in screen time, and we encourage parents not to have their kids on screens all the time. And how ironic is it that here we are having kids on screens so that we can keep a connection with the children we work with. And I've seen children in the gallery view of Zoom, because they can see all the kids. And so there'd be a teacher over here reading a story, and a teacher and whatever. And then there's a bunch of kids. And I've seen children playing with each other through the screen. Like they're like ignoring the story. And they like can see each other. And they're in their own homes. And they're like going like this. And then they're giggling. And then the other one will do it. So I was in one of the circles, and I wasn't disrespecting my team member who was reading. I found it so fascinating that they were that resilient, and they couldn't have done that. They couldn't have played with each other if they hadn't felt safe and comfortable and accepted and a sense of belonging. They would have just either not come to the Zoom circle, or they would have like just been like petrified the whole time. And so you know what I'm like. So I started, of course, to play with them through the screen. And why not? Because you know what? In real life, if you had a circle, that's what's going on. Yeah. I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about, we don't make them stay at circles. Mm-hmm. So some of them, you can see them wandering off and playing with toys in their house. They just every now and then wander over and they look to see that we're still there or what's going on. And they wander off and they do their own thing. So kids are resilient and resourceful.
Right.
And if we weren't in a pandemic, I would like say, Dan, even in the pandemic, I want to say, Dan, I agree with every word you have said. And today, when I first read it this morning, some other people that I know, that I've been at conferences with, commented on Dan's article. I read the names. I thought, oh, I know them. And they're like, oh my gosh, I totally agree. You know, I don't think anybody went, preach! But these are people I think the world of and I respect. And they're like, Dan, you're completely right. And since the other day when I read Tom's article and I talked some more to some people currently offering care, like, how do the ECEs feel reading those articles?
Right.
How would they feel working in that center? And they read that article about the work they're doing.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, if you were that person and you read that article and you looked to Dan and you looked to Tom for validity in working with children, how would you feel?
Definitely disappointed because, like, I mean, they're putting in a lot of hard work there if they're trying to keep the kids socially. I mean, I'd be scared, I'd be disappointed, I'd be anxious to go back to work because they're saying, yeah, I don't know.
So I'm talking about the ECEs who might be going back to open a center.
Right.
But I'm also talking about the ones who've been doing it for 7 or 8 weeks. How would they feel reading that?
Yeah.
You're being super shy.
I am shy.
And you're scared that Dan will be angry with us because you said that. You said, Mama, we're not saying anything. Don't do it, Mama, because Dan might be upset. And I'm like,
Well,
part of having a relationship is loving and respecting someone enough to listen to them. And I just said, I believe every word he said. But it's a different situation.
yeah.
So you're an ECE and you've been working for 8 weeks in one of those centers. And you read that, how do you feel about your work?
Like, it's pointless, basically. Like, I don't know. It would definitely, like, bring me down and, like, hurt my spirits to read that if I was working with kids this whole time. Because it's a lot of work to try to do that. And, like, reading that, like, it's just not gonna work out is very disappointed and like...
And so one of his biggest messages in it is stand up.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm the proudest of as your mom is that you have a big voice. You have always stood up when something is wrong. You have. And I'd love to think that you got that from me. I mean, I think maybe you've got it from me to a degree. But there's times that I'm scared to speak up. At least there certainly was a lot of times when I was younger. So he keeps saying, and the image on his article is stand up. So who are we standing up to? The government? The health inspector that comes? Like you're just trying to do the best you can for the kids who are there and keep them safe and keep yourself safe and let people who need to work and still be authentic and real enough for children in difficult circumstances.
Right.
Is this my Mother's Day gift?
What?
This video?
No. I'm not as good at public speaking as you are.
Oh my gosh, I ramble so much. What is my cohesive thought?
Repeating stuff.
What?
It's better than repeating stuff. I just repeat stuff over and over.
I think that early childhood educators who read those two pieces, when I did my review of Tom's piece the other day, I did not think about those early childhood educators. And I owe them an apology. Because they're trying to do the best that they can, and they're trying to do best practices for children, and to genuinely be there for them and have authentic, meaningful relationships in unusual circumstances. And I think that it's really important that while everything that Dan and Tom said, those are our values, and those are what we know to be true, but you have to take these things out of the closet or the shelf or wherever the dust is on them. Not that we have dusty values, because if you're practicing it every day and you're working with the kids every day and you're fully committed to being there and saying to each family, I've been waiting for you, and to do that Sammy put the paper on the wall song with the kids and hug the kids. I mean, I don't know one ECE whose heart isn't already broken that they can't hug kids. And the couple centers that I've talked to recently, the stories that they've told me where little kids have gone for the hug and the ECE has taken a step back from the child. Like that little kid saying goodbye to you at the end of the day went sort of like, because of a habit, went like running towards you like, oh, bye, Lusky, have a good weekend. And so what you did, because we're pretending that you're the ECE, you take a couple steps back and you wave at the kid and you're like, bye, Heather, have a good weekend. And this child looked a little bit startled, but they didn't look upset. They just looked like they were thinking for a minute or two. And then they stepped back a couple steps too and said, have a good weekend. So aren't they not having their needs met so that they can understand it? Like, are we selling children short? Because I'm not saying like once Corona's over, we can't 150% hug the heck out of kids again. I mean, maybe we shouldn't hug the heck out of them. But those are best practices. But I don't think these conditions give us the opportunity to practice best practices. So we have to come up with the next to the best practices we can come up with, so that centers can continue to exist and not close and not disappear into dust, because centers are struggling and they need all that, I'm sorry to say, all that crap, like the economy has to get going. So nobody wants to sacrifice children or childcare centers or ECEs, and to say at what cost, which is what I said to Liska in my video, because you haven't watched it and you didn't watch the video with Corey and I, but I said, at what cost? Because I was like trying to say, at what cost? Should children suffer? At what cost? Because I read Tom's thing, and I still agree with what Tom said and what Dan said. But you know what? How can we invalidate the work that our colleagues are doing in those centers already operating and providing that programming and care and love, and the rest of us who are just about to reopen and do the same thing? We're invalidating us before we ever get going again. Maybe we should just have a little bit more trust in the early childhood educators.
Yeah.
That they listened to Tom before, and they listened to Bev Boz before, and they listened to Dan Hodgins before, and they know all of that, and they can be creative thinkers and work as a team and find a way to have real meaningful connection with children, even with a mask on.
And no hugging.
And no hugging. And hand washing for 20 seconds, and don't touch your face. And this is your space. This 6 feet area is where you're playing with your blocks. And I'm sorry, that's not your space. This is Liski's space. Anyway, those are our thoughts. I asked her, because she read the articles, and I said, would you do a video with me? Because why I thought of it was when she looked at me and she said, are they saying centers shouldn't reopen? And I was like, no. And then I was like, well, I don't know. So we're asking Tom and Dan, is that what you're saying? Because maybe you have more to write. Anyway, thanks, Liski. Happy Mother's Day for other mothers.